Dr. Sung and I are going to go head to head. I am so excited about this talk. The social streams, you guys can ask questions. I don't know if we're going to have time. I'm already running over and taking some of Dr. Sung's time, but we have had a lot of questions come in, so I may add a couple if that's cool with you. Awesome. Okay, so breaking news. Dr. Sung's going to break down here. This is we have not had this in our community. We get WAVE, we get PTC, we get uniQure, we get Skyhawk. It just keeps coming in, and I don't even know if we really know how to act or even break down this positive information because it's never happened to us. So Dr. Sung is here to help us. So first question, what do these results mean? So this one we are talking about WAVE. So caudate loss, significantly, statistically significant, allele specific. What do all these words mean?
Great. The way I can break this down, and Edgar talked about it a little bit in his talk too, I've decided I'm going to try to use a sports analogy and try to thread that through. I think most people understand sports. So if you think about like a sports team, on the offense, you have a lot of different players. You have quarterbacks, tackles, running backs, wide receivers. And if the defense tackles a bunch of players, you really need to tackle the people with the ball. Does that make sense if you're playing football? So you got to think about the caudate and the putamen are the two parts of the brain that we call the striatum collectively. That would be like if you had the running back and the fullback. Those are the backfield, right? Striatum's the umbrella name for caudate and putamen. The caudate and the putamen are the two key parts of the brain that shrink the most in Huntington's disease. So you can think about those are the parts of the brain that have the ball, and that's who we're trying to tackle with these gene therapies or with all of our disease-modifying therapies. When you have statistically significant lowering in the amount of shrinkage that you have in the caudate, what that means is that we're seeing slowing of the normal rate of shrinkage of that part of the brain, which normally shrinks a lot in HD. So that's a good thing. And statistically significant means that when it's like the likelihood that these changes are chance or not. So that means they've calculated it enough. If we see it in 5 patients or 10 patients or 20 patients, then it's unlikely, the slowing of shrinkage that we see is unlikely to be chance. So that's what statistically significant always means, is that they've done the calculations based on a statistical analysis that is most likely to be real, right? That's what we really care about, that this is most likely to be a real effect. You never can say 100%, but more likely than not. And then the allele specific part, remember that we have 2 copies of every gene, one that you got from mom, one that you got from dad. And WAVE's drug has shown in their study that they can just knock down the mutant Huntington, the one that you got from your affected parent, and the one that you got from your parent that had Huntington's disease, and leaves the normal one alone. So that's a good thing. So they showed that they were able to do that. And remember, the other thing as far as what does this mean? So if we're talking about WAVE, this is just their phase 2 safety study. So they're showing that they can just knock down the mutant and leave the wild type alone. That's good. That's a really good thing. Overall, they said it was safe. They were generally fairly vague about that. And one thing I did want to call your attention to when we say, what does this mean for us as the HD community? That they buried in their announcement, honestly, is that they had, in treated patients, a 60% increase in NfL. Had significant lowering in mutant Huntington specifically, but they had a lot of increase in NFL. So the way I describe this using the same football analogy is, right? Like in football, we've got to score more points than the other team. So scoring touchdowns is a good thing. I think lowering mutant Huntington protein, which the WAVE drug was able to do, that's like scoring touchdowns. They were able to score some touchdowns. That's great. But this big increase in NFL is also like they threw some interceptions. At the end of the day, you want to score more touchdowns than throw interceptions, but we don't know what this means yet for safety. So that's my interpretation of it. It's good. I'm a little worried about this 60% increase in NFL. If you remember in the first round, the Generation HD1 trial that ultimately got the plug pulled, they were seeing 40% increases in NFL. So this is actually higher increases in NFL than what we saw with tominersen that ultimately led to the plug being pulled. Now with Generation HD2, they're looking at the group of patients that did not see increases in NFL, like with a low dose and with the younger group of patients, things like that. So in theory, the new spin up of Generation HD2 should be using a dose and a group of patients that we shouldn't see that, but we don't know until we do it, right? But I think that's the way I think about it. Throwing touchdowns is good. Lowering mutant huntingtin is good. Throwing interceptions is bad. And so increases in NFL are bad. And it's all about the balance of that and trying to weigh that out, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. So NFL.
Okay.
Not the football NFL.
Yeah. Yeah.
What is that? What does that, a spike of it, what does that do to us?
Yeah. Okay. So it doesn't necessarily cause anything, but okay, you're right. It's a little tricky to use a football analogy, and then we're talking about NFL. But NFL in the HD terms, it stands for neurofilament light chain. So the neurofilament is like filaments, if you think about like strings, and neuro. So it's the strings that are inside the neurons or the brain cells. So I think about it like the frame of your house, right? So all brain cells have this framework to keep the cell from collapsing, and that's the neurofilament, right? And it's very specific to brain cells. And normally when you measure in the spinal fluid or measure in the blood, you shouldn't find high levels of neurofilament, because that would mean brain cells are dying and spilling out the framework to a level that you can measure it. Does that make sense? So when we see neurofilament going up, it always means neurofilament does go up in the course of Huntington's disease unless we do something about it, right? And it's a sign that brain cells, unfortunately, are dying in HD, and we know that that happens. If we're doing a treatment and that treatment is causing the NFL to go up, that means ultimately brain cells are dying, which is causing that level to go up, and that's bad. So that's why it's a marker potentially of something bad happening, and always should give us sign for pause. Anyway, but that's my explanation of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that brings me to the question of that one that's come in, because all these questions we're asking you today, I forgot to say, these were submitted by the community. This was submitted by you guys. So we're asking Dr. Sung, opposed to going to WAVE and uniQure and PTC and Genentech, we want this like fair balance of let's talk to Dr. Sung. So that's what we're doing today. And now, so let's talk about, someone did ask, which puts this in, is how safe is WAVE really? And so we go back to Generation HD1, and everything for 2 trials phases, we're saying safe, tolerable, move to the next phase, keep going, safe, tolerable. And then we get to phase 3 at the very end and we go, not safe. And
yeah,
and it made everyone. So this is in early, like you were saying, development. Yeah. And they're saying safe and tolerable, but they're having this NFL spike. So how do you break that down?
Yeah, that's, I think, what I would worry about. So safe and tolerable, as in early in this short 6 to 12 month study, we're not seeing bad things happen. We're not seeing a lot of side effects. They reported expected side effects that you would get from getting spinal taps, like headaches and back pain and things like that. Obviously, you're getting a 5-inch needle put in your back, that's going to be sore. But they didn't see anything else in the short amount of time that was a sign for concern. But that's my worry, is that it's short. And so far it's looking safe. But just as you mentioned, Katie, that we were seeing 40% increases in the same phase that WAVE just reported out in with tominersen. But they said they didn't see anything either, so they moved on to phase 3, and now you have a bigger, longer trial, more patients. And what we think is that if the NFL is going up, it's a sign that maybe there are some bad things happening, and that ultimately, if we follow long enough, we could see negative things like patients worsening, which is what we don't want to see. And that's the worry. As far as why, nobody really knows why, but some people think there's a toxic effect of what they call the ASO backbone, which is the way that the drug is delivered, both for tominersen and the WAVE drug. And if you put in too much of it, dose is too high, then that toxic thing overrides the good thing that it's trying to do, potentially. It's just, we have to be careful and seeing. It's still good news, but it can lower just the mutant huntingtin protein and leave the normal huntingtin alone. That's great news. Overall safe, great news, but I'm just worried about it. It's all things. Unless you throw a pick six, it doesn't directly cause the other team's score to go up. But if you throw enough interceptions over time, it's going to be bad. That's my metered expectation thing. Let's just watch and see.
Sure. So besides the NFL, how do these results with WAVE compare to the Roche trial, even as far as the protein lowering? And how are we making comparison?
It's very similar. The amount that they were able to lower mutant huntingtin protein is just a little bit less than, maybe 5% less, 5 to 10% less than what they were able to see with Roche Genentech's drug. But their thing is, we're a little bit less, but it's very clearly just the mutant that they're lowering, and they're leaving the wild type alone. Whereas Roche's drug lowers the mutant a little bit more, but it's also lowering the good huntingtin too. And what's the effect of that? So that, I think that's the numbers comparison there.
Great. And so this is a concerning thing for me. So let's talk a little bit about a SNP, testing for them, and what happens if you don't have this SNP, because this is a big concern. You already have to go through gene testing. When you're testing for HD, I often hear of it called the genetic lottery. You win or you lose.
Yeah.
50% chance. And people go through so much during this and then process these genetic results and have to move forward. And now we may be asking them to take the genetic lottery again.
Yeah. So that is the way. If you don't understand what a SNP is, I think if you think about it, the analogy that WAVE uses is a kite, which I think is not a bad idea. So if you've played with kites before, you have the main body of the kite, and then you have a tail of the kite, right? And all of that is attached to a string, and you're flying it around. The main body of the kite is like the Huntington gene, right? And that's what you're talking about, Katie. You have the lottery on what did you get? Did you get the green one that's normal, or did you get the red one that is the mutated one, right? But all HD genes have a little tail, and that's that SNP. That is normally not what we sequence when we're testing for do you have the mutation or not. But there is something attached to it, right? And so that is what WAVE's drug is going after, and that's how they lower just the mutant, is they target this SNP, which is the tail of the kite, and they're grabbing that tail and pull the whole kite down. Does that make sense? What you're saying, Katie, is that theirs requires that you have not just that SNP, but you have to have that SNP on your mutant Huntington copy, not on your normal copy, right? So there's a bunch of different SNPs out there, and you have to have the one that their drug is targeting, and you have to have it attached as the tail to your mutant Huntington kite. They don't know for sure, but what they've reported is that of all the HD patients that are out there, the ones who will have this SNP that their drug targets is about 30-ish% of all the 30 to 40% maybe is what they say, of all the HD patients that are out there in the world. But if you flip it the other way around, that means 60 to 70% of them, even if their drug works, 60 to 70% of HD patients will not be eligible for this treatment because you don't have the right tail that it's going to pull down. Does that make sense? It's still good. The more treatments that we have that could help HD patients, great. Anybody that wants to bring stuff, I say let's bring it. But if you're looking for the one thing that will be the cure for all HD patients, I think none of them is going to be it. So we're going to need lots of options for us so that we can have options for our whole community, right?
So you pushed right into my next question, which is so great. So people are like, now WAVE is showing this really good reduction. It's safe. It's not hitting the mutated allele, not hitting the healthy allele. And so why do we need Generation HD? Like, why do we need it?
Yeah. And that's the thing, is that Generation HD2 in theory could be for, you don't have to have a specific SNP to get into it. And the other thing too, the biggest thing in my mind is that they're looking with their lower dose that in their earlier trials did not show increases of NFL. And that's my worry with the WAVE, is what is this 60% increase in NFL going to mean over time. Whereas in theory, the low dose now of tominersen that they've chosen, that Roche has chosen, should not see that.
Didn't the NFL, and I'm going back in my memory bank here, from the Generation HD1, didn't the NFL and Generation HD1 go back down to baseline?
Once you finish treatment, yes.
Yeah.
But Wave showed that too. Once you stop treatment, it came back down. But that's actually means that it's from the drug. So anyway.
Yeah.
Wave's data that they just released showed that too, that it came back down to baseline, but it came back down to baseline after they stopped getting treatments. And that means the increase is from the treatment. So that's the thing.
Yeah, and a lot of people are really talking about access, right? They're talking about, and we really went through this in the beginning of the day when we did our caregiver panel, and they're frustrated that JHD is not a part of the clinical trials. They're frustrated end-stage HD is not a part of clinical trials.
Right.
The community is frustrated about how they can't even get into them, let alone they are not a part of these trials. How are they going to even get access if any of them are approved?
Yeah, and I get that frustration, but I think that my answer to that is that there is what I said, which is none of these are going to be the one panacea for everybody. If we think about it, JHD patients are very different than your 70-year-olds with a 40 repeat exactly that started having symptoms in their 60 at 60. We want disease modifying therapies for the entire spectrum of HD, but I don't think it will be any one drug that does it. So I wouldn't worry that this drug is testing this narrow group that doesn't mean it's for you, because look at this positive news that we've had over the last couple of weeks. It's been like unprecedented time in the history of HD. I think this is showing there will be something for you. We've just got to wait for the right one. And I think that's fine. If Skyhawk's drug works for this people and Roche's drug works for these people and PTC's drug works for these people, great. You know what I mean? But I think that's what we're striving for as a science community, all of us doing these trials every day, is we want to find it for everybody. And it's probably going to take a lot of these drugs to get approved, but we're moving in the right direction, finally.
Exactly. So what is the time frame plan next step, let's for Wave specifically?
Okay, and I can hit on all of them. So Wave, they feel good about it. And this is my interpretation based on the press releases. I don't have any insider information. We don't know how this will go. To spin up for a big phase 3 trial is hundreds of millions of dollars. And so it's expensive. And remember, when they planned their phase of their trial, which is, these are safety studies. Phase 3 is, does it work or does it not? And phase 3, does it work or does it not, is what leads to approval from FDA or EMA. When they even have their plan, hey, this is what we're going to do for our phase 3 trial, that plan has to be signed off by FDA and EMA for them to proceed. And that's a lot of what takes the time. The average time from positive phase 2 results to launch of a phase 3 trial is 1 year. So I would guess, and that's going to apply really to both Wave and PTC, who have both announced positive phase 2 results. It's going to take them both at least a year to spin up and be ready for phase 3. They've said that for phase 3, both Wave and PTC, that they'll come back to the US. We'll have to see how it all goes.
So you talked about US, you said EMA and FDA. So I want to ask different things about that. Let's dive in a little bit about that, because so just so you know, everyone, we're talking about the FDA, which is in the US, and the EMA, which is in Europe, and they're so different. As far as I couldn't believe when I heard it. Let's talk about uniQure starting out. People in the uniQure trial in Europe, they couldn't have sham surgeries. We're putting people in the US through placebo brain surgery. So let's dive a little bit into that.
Yeah, so the EMA is the equivalent of the FDA, but it's for all of Europe, right? And so that's like the entire EU except for England, right? Because England's not part of the EU anymore. France, Spain, Italy, Germany, all the major companies in Europe, all the major countries in Europe, they're all part of the EU. And the EMA is their drug or medical governing body for all of it. Inherent, because there's multiple different countries represented in the EMA. There are there's people that are making these decisions, and these people are representing their countries, right? You have someone from France, someone from Germany, someone from Italy, etc. So in order to meet everybody's needs and satisfy everybody, EMA has historically always been much more lenient or liberal than the FDA, right? Because if you're going to have to meet everybody's needs across different countries, then you have to be inherently a little bit more flexible, right? So you see things in the EMA, like they're much more tolerant of studies for JHD, right? Because certain countries are really going to push for that are representing in the EU. Or things like sham surgeries, things like that. They're going to say that is not ethical to put HD patients through a fake surgery. They're putting their lives on the line, and you're not even going to give them the thing that might help them. Whereas the FDA in the US prides itself on being extremely conservative, meaning this kind of ivory tower of data to protect our US citizens the most. So they tend to not let things go forward, or are really strict about what data that they'll consider, things like that. Therefore, FDA has not been very nice about allowing studies to proceed with JHD patients. The statistical better way is to have a true placebo group, which is going to be a sham surgery group, which is not ethically a great way to go, but it's statistically the best way to go. So the FDA chose that, right? So the FDA said to uniQure, you can't proceed in the US without giving some patients fake surgery. And the EMA said you can't proceed in Europe if you do fake surgery because that's unethical. So it's this interesting thing, but there's always this tension, and we have to play a little bit to our governing bodies. And the FDA is just extremely conservative, always has been, and they pride themselves on it now. But that's where your voice, the HD community's voice, matters. Because you say, this is what matters to me. I don't care what matters statistically to you, the FDA. You can say, this is what matters to me and my family. And so we have this big PFDD meeting in the fall with the FDA. Let your voice be heard with that. That is going to be huge. Anyway, we digress a little bit.
Absolutely. No, so next question. So you've always been really one that talks about this cocktail. You talk about may not be, we need a lot of things, and it may not be one thing. It may be we are taking multiple things. So let's talk about, so something like AMT 130, right? And then you have some PTC, the 518 trial.
Right.
Could they like cover you? Could there be like, they cover each other? Like after the surgery, can PTC be taken to keep that, to keep the protein down?
Yeah, what we think is that there are different mechanisms. AMT 130, uniQure's drug, is a gene therapy that's injected. And as long as those brain cells that it got injected to stay alive, they should produce the stuff that suppresses mutant huntingtin production for the whole life. You don't necessarily need it to add to it with a PTC drug to necessarily keep it down. But I would think about it more in a different way from a cocktail standpoint. Not that you couldn't take them together, but remember the uniQure drug is injected deep in the brain, so it's going to have the most effect there deep in the brain, a little less effect in the outer part of the brain, and very little to no effect, or I would think, in the rest of the body, right? And remember, the HD gene is expressed in every cell in the entire body, right? But the PTC drug, or any of the oral drugs, because of the way you take it and a pill, is probably going to have a lot more penetration in the whole rest of the body. What if there are things happening with the HD mutation in the liver or the heart or the kidneys and the nerves in the arms and the legs, right? Right. So those are the things. So maybe between brain surgery, spinal tap injection, IV injection into the bloodstream, and a pill, we have our total body cure for HD. That's how I would think about it. A pill picks up where it leaves off, because whatever the mechanism is, as long as it's still working, which gene therapy should be forever, spinal taps are going to be time, and then the pills are going to be as long as you're taking the pill. I think that's what I would say on as far as how they could potentially work together. Any sense?
Yeah. And so we've already covered this one. Is PT trying to go into a phase 3 trial in Europe or in the PTC?
US. They know they need to, if the FDA will not accept data that's all collected outside of the US. Never have, never will. So that in order to FDA, you need to show them data collected on Americans because they're like, we're the American governing body, so you need to have shown studies done here. So all the big companies know that they've got to come here for their big phase 3 trials. The asterisk that I would say is if your phase 2 trials are good enough, uniQure's AMT 130, even though it's a safety trial in phase 2, it's the first one that we've had that actually shows any functional, like motor cognitive benefits, statistically significant benefits in HD. Maybe that's good enough that the FDA will take them, especially with their RMAT designation. There is a possibility the FDA will say, we'll just give you accelerated approval like these Alzheimer's drugs got without you even having to do a phase 3 trial. So other than that, unless the FDA says that, like we might grant you approval just on your phase 2 data so good, we're going to give you approval now. Short of that, they're all going to have to do a phase 3 trial and they'll come to the US for that, crank up. It's going to take at least a year to get ready for that. But that's fine. We've got a roadmap.
Yeah. There was a hold put on the PTC trial. What was that hold and why was it lifted?
Great question. So the hold that was put on the PTC trial was not anything due to bad data. It wasn't like, if you remember the Novartis drug, we were seeing lots of patients develop nerve damage in their arms and legs. It wasn't it for anything like that. It was purely because PTC wanted to offer what's called an open label extension, meaning once you're done with your drug versus placebo part of the clinical trial, they wanted to guarantee that when you enter the trial, that when you finish your part that we're doing the research on, that we'll give you the real thing. Even if you're on sugar pill, we'll switch over and give you the real thing as a reward for you committing your time and your life to do this trial, which I think is a noble thing. But the FDA again said we've got to protect our people, and they said no. So the FDA put this hold on it in the US because they said we don't want you guaranteeing to our citizens that they'll get the real thing when you haven't proven that it's safe. Does that make sense?
Yep.
That was the FDA imposed this hold because they said you can't promise to give these patients the real thing until you've proven that it's safe. And so now with this, they were going to open back up in the US, but then they filled up with all the patients that they needed in the EU. So they just proceeded with data analysis. But that's the reason for the hold. Nothing nefarious there, unless you call FDA nefarious.
Yeah. So what trials right now? I know so many of these trials are on hold, right? They're going over data. They're looking. So right now, Dr. Sun, what trials are active? People can enroll in the United States, and we're rolling.
That's really going to be Roche's Generation HD2 is open and still accepting more patients. uniQure, Edgar presented they are getting 10 more patients for this cohort 3. But as far as I know, all 10 of those slots are already accounted for. So there's no room for anybody else in uniQure's study unless one of the 10 that's planned to go in drops out. So that is for treatment trials that are ongoing. That's about it. Alnylam is the next closest one. They've selected all their sites. They'll be ready to start. That's a spinal tap injection of RNA interference. We don't have any technologies like that under investigation. That will be ready to take US patients probably October-ish. There's a big meeting in September and they'll launch right after that. So that'll be October-ish. And then Spark has a gene therapy, brain surgery gene therapy, much like uniQure's, and they're going to get cranked up in the November, December range, probably ready to take US patients probably early January 2025 is what I would guess, something like that. Those are the next ones. But that does lead me a little bit to what you were talking about in that conversation with BJ, that some centers of excellence, they can only see the site that they're doing. Sorry, they can only see the trial that they're doing. That is unfortunately the case. I have the fortunate blessing that I can devote like all of my clinical efforts to HD, and that's what I think about all day, every day. So I really try to pay attention to all the trials that are available for all my patients, even if I'm not doing it. But then also, I will play the game and try to push hard to get selected to do every trial. But just know if your site is not able to do every single trial, it's not necessarily failings on their part. It's very hard and it's very political to get selected to these. And it takes a lot of energy and whatever to play that game. And some people don't want to play that game. Sorry.
No, so now we know Generation HD2 is really right now the active trial enrolling earlier onset. It is a spinal injection. It's every other month, Dr. Sam?
No, quarterly.
Every quarter.
So just three. Yep. So 3 a year.
3 a year. They are actively enrolling. How can people find those sites that want to get involved?
It's on clinicaltrials.gov, all the active sites. All of the HSG sites have from Roche a JPEG, which is a map of the US that lists all the Generation HD2 sites. So they're still looking for more patients.
How about patients?
How many more do we need? We probably need 60 to 100 more patients. If you can do it, they'd welcome you in it.
Okay, great. And then so you can find the inclusion to exclusion criteria. I'm sorry, I'm trying not to miss, I feel so routine on my phone, but I'm trying not to miss any questions. Oh, perfect. Okay, so to let you guys know, I would have missed this. In your boxes, your swag boxes, hundreds and hundreds went out across the United States. HD2's map is in there. So when you open up your box, you pull your stuff out, you'll see a map of where they are enrolling if you're interested. Okay, and then
the other things, and you asked me, what can you do? You can do Enroll HD and everybody can do Power HD.
Yeah,
right?
So that's my plug. So he beat me to the punch. So yes.
Sorry.
No, you're good. No, I'm so glad you did. And my final thoughts on this is, and thank you, before I final thought it, any final thoughts on your end at all?
I think that's the thing is these last 4 weeks have been just the most exciting time. I hope you guys have been excited to check your news feed every day. It seems like it's just been news after good news. Tempered enthusiasm, but we'll take all the good news that we can get. At least it's not bad news. We're not there yet. We don't have drugs that we can put in your hands or in your bodies yet, but every step takes us closer to. So keep up the hope and we'll keep fighting. And you guys keep fighting too. And we do it for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And my final thoughts are, I've been an HD advocate for 19 years. And 19 years ago, I remember when I went to my first conference and they were talking about fish oil. They were talking about something called Dynabomb. They were just starting to talk about creatine, CoQ10. And then there was a talk that there was a history of blueberries. And I was like, really, is this it? 19. Now I'm going to fast forward to now. We are talking about disease, where it does talk about disease modifying therapies. We're talking about gene therapies. We are coming to a new phase. And I am so excited to be a part of this journey with you guys through this. The one thing I want to thank more than anyone are the clinical trial participants. Me and my husband participated in 11 clinical trials and studies while he was alive. It is not easy. And I know that. It is so much burden on the family, but you guys have started those changes. You guys are the reason why these changes are going to be made. And it's not just the interventional trials. And I know, I am sorry, I understand JHD community, late onset, people on psychiatric drugs that cannot get in these trials. I understand that the inclusion exclusion criteria in these trials are hard. And so thank you for trying. And I know it's frustrating that you can't be in them. But you can be in things like Enroll, you could be in Power HD, My HD Story, a Project Aware, WarePut 2.0. There are so many things you can do. And I know that sometimes doesn't feel like, I know we say, oh, it's clinical trial, there's a placebo, you may get the placebo. In your mind, when you go in there, your hope is you get that drug, and that hope is that drug works. And I know that because I walked in those clinic doors with my family. And so not being able to even walk in those clinic doors, I know that's frustrating, but no, we still need your help. We need you to fill out things like Power HD. We need you to fill out those FDA dockets, that open FDA docket that's still open right now. That gives you a voice when the pharmaceutical companies go behind the closed door meetings in the FDA, and we are not allowed to be there, and our voice is not allowed to be there. That docket can be pulled up and it can be presented. The FDA cannot deny the words we said because it is on their open docket. Show up, use your voice, tell your story. All those FDA letter campaigns we've done, thank you for everyone who has signed and participated. We're getting another PFDD. In 2015, I flew to Silver Springs. I was patient number 1 that spoke in that meeting. It is powerful. And to all of you that are going to speak in this next one, I wish you the best of luck, and you are changing the world of HD. You guys, everything you do makes a difference. So continue to advocate, continue to push hard. And when there is something that you feel like there's a door that's closed on you, come to Health for HD and let's open one, and let's find one for you to open together side by side. I think that's it. Dr. Sung, I will let you go for my final thoughts. Thank you so much for coming on with us today, and we will see you down the road.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Katie.